Good afternoon and welcome to the Pennsylvania Press Club. I'm Dennis Owens of ABC 27, Vice President of the PA Press Club, and your host for today's luncheon. Joining me at the head table, Jeanette Krebs of Krebs Communications and Public Engagement. Thank you for being here and thank you for your support. The Pennsylvania Press Club luncheon series could not be possible without the support of the generous organizations that are listed on our banner. Today's luncheon being taped and carried throughout Pennsylvania to the television audience of the Pennsylvania Cable Network, PCN. Our speaker today is Pennsylvania Senate Democratic Leader Jay Costa. Senator Costa represents portions of the city of Pittsburgh, East Hills communities, areas of the Mon Valley and South Hills, and apparently the Pittsburgh Pirates is in your district, or at least you're a big fan. They took 2 out of 3 from the Philadelphia Phillies this weekend. They're flying high. I will say I'm a Phillies fan, but I did go to that stadium, and it is my new favorite stadium. If you haven't been, you got to go. It is just spectacular. I still think the Phillies are a better team, but you have a nice stadium, so you got to have something, but it's beautiful. As a lifelong resident of Allegheny County, Senator Costa was born and raised in Pittsburgh, now lives with his wife Roxanne in Forest Hills. He has 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter, son of the late Allegheny County Treasurer Jay Costa Sr., graduate of Taylor Alderdice High School, Community College of Allegheny County, Indiana University of Pennsylvania, and he holds a Juris Doctorate from Duquesne University. Those are a lot of tuitions. I don't think parents would want those these days. Now, before his election to the Senate, Senator Costa was a deputy sheriff in Allegheny County and the Allegheny County Register of Wills. Senator Costa was elected Senate Democratic leader in 2010. Though they have been in the minority the entire time, there is optimism that Democrats are gaining. I'm sure he's going to talk about that. But as they say, timing is everything. And he joins us today on what has been one of the most eventful 8 days in the history of presidential politics in American history. About 24 hours after President Biden announced he's not seeking re-election. Governor Shapiro, of course, is in the center of talk about higher office, and about 10 days after the budget was signed, and you are a delegate, you will be going to the convention. So you've got a lot of different options to talk about, including the Pittsburgh Pirates, because they've been hot. But we're curious to see what he's going to talk about. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Senator Jay Costa.
Well, thank you, Dennis, very much, and Press Club, thank you for the opportunity to be here today and have a conversation with all of you about certainly what's happened over the course of the last 24 hours or the last 8 days or so, coming from Western PA and Pittsburgh and the impact certain incidents had over there, but also to talk a little bit about our state budget, because I think over the course of the past 8 or 10 days, we've lost sight of some of the very positive things that we were able to do in our general fund budget. What I thought I'd do today, if I could, is highlight some of the priorities and important aspects of this budget that Senate Democrats worked closely on, and to make certain that we were able to get them across the finish line and the role that we played along those lines, because we do have a number of things that I think are important to talk about. Then beyond that, I would like to talk about some of the things that we didn't get done, the work that we need to do moving forward as we begin the conversation as we go into the fall. And maybe take a little peek about what might be going on in 25, 26 as it relates to our legislative priorities and the like, and where things might stand after the election along those lines. So let me start with the budget. I think, as you all know, we did get through our budget process, and it was a significant budget, almost $600 million, with this extreme, strong focus on basic education in particular. Education more broadly, but I want to focus on some of the things that we did with respect to basic education. You all know about what took place with respect to our Commonwealth Court and the Basic Education Funding Commission, their recommendations that were recommended also by the governor in his budget address. We were able to address that to the tune of $560-some million investment in our school districts across Pennsylvania. To me, that was big, because that addressed the adequacy and tax equity issue that we've been dealing with for so many years, and it's a great first start. The first start towards a year, looks to be, we hope 7 straight years we'll be making these type of investments to get folks on parity with respect to the school districts and spending. But beyond that, we also did $285 million in basic education to all 501 school districts. So it's important to recognize that on the school district side, with the adequacy and tax equity, only about 300 school districts shared in those proceeds. But the 285, all 500 school districts participated, and it was a significant boost to a lot of folks. But beyond that, we did investments again in special education, $100 million in special education, $100 million in facility improvements to go along what we already did last year. Also, $100 million in what I'll call mental health and school security measures, important aspects of what we do with regard to education, and certainly increases we made in early learning. All those were extremely important as we went forward, and something I think we're very proud of, because those are things that Senate Democrats have talked quite a bit about, and we're part of that conversation, particularly as it related to the commission work. But we also did some things in higher ed that really haven't been done in a number of years. Probably the most significant is the comprehensive measure that dealt with three aspects of higher education: governance, where we put into place a new state board of higher education, which will be looking at how we're going to determine the accountability, making sure that programs are working and make sure that these universities have outcome-based performances they need to meet to be able to continue to get more funding. And then finally, the work that was done, what I'll call student support. Transparency about what costs are going to look like, and also mandating financial counseling before somebody leaves college or after they graduate. Those are things that I think we've been wanting to do for quite a long time. But we also made investments in our state system of higher ed. Our state system schools, as you know, have been going through a transition and consolidation to some degree. For the second year in a row, we provided a 6% increase to our state system schools to allow them the opportunity to continue that integration that's taking place and making sure they have the appropriate level of resources to be able to do what needs to be done to allow that to happen and be able to retain students. Because both times it's led to a zero increase in tuition, which I think is a strong message to folks in Pennsylvania. But also with respect to our community colleges, I serve as a trustee and also the treasurer of our Allegheny County Community College. And I can tell you the 6% increase that we put forward is having a major impact on what we're doing there. It allowed us the opportunity to not increase taxes last year when we made investment, and the same thing, or not taxes, excuse me, tuition, but it's going to be the same thing as we move forward. So education has really been a big priority for us in our caucus, and we're pleased to see what took place there. The last piece I would mention is something that came out of our caucus was a student-teacher stipend, to making certain that we have resources to garner and capture those student teachers we have here in Pennsylvania to address that pipeline of teacher shortages, and we did that with another $20 million increase along those lines. We also did stuff in public safety protection. We have money going into, I believe it's about $56.5 million, an increase of about 11.5 into what's called a BOOST program, something that our caucus and others work with the Lieutenant Governor to make sure that we have programs in our communities, in our neighborhoods, to allow kids to have the opportunity to participate in programming, being able to work with local community groups to be able to do that, after-school programs, weekend programs. That was a significant increase. And in the violence prevention program, or violence intervention program, we had another $5 million. So in that space, to be able to help educate our kids and protect our kids and provide our neighborhoods with resources to be able to do what needs to be done to grow the number of kids participating in programs, we took care of that. Probably the biggest area, though, I think we also have to talk about, second big area, relates to economic development. When you think one of the programs that the governor proposed that we were able to put into place is $20 million we put in for Main Street Matters. As somebody who serves on a local CDC, I can tell you what role resources from the state government to a community organization, how important that is. And there are a variety of things we've done in that space. Certainly that $20 million is extremely important to help our neighborhoods and our community groups. But some of the other things we did with respect to the tax code, the neighborhood assistance program, doubling that from $36 million to $72 million. Let me tell you what that means to a lot of community organizations. That's a lifeline of what they'll be able to do. The historic tax credits going from $5 million to $20 million, quadrupling that. To me, that's a huge increase to be able to do the same type of things. But we also did, the big thing that we did was the sites program, creating the program for sites. The governor talked about it as a major economic part of his major economic plan going forward for the next 10 years. $500 million is going to be invested in our communities across Pennsylvania to grow sites and to build these sites, prepare them to be able to be attractions for companies who want to come locate here. We're not talking about small developable sites. We're talking about those large major ones, but we're also talking about some investments, given the nature of the definition of sites, what could take place in some of our cities and redevelopment along those lines. So there's this broad definition that I think allows us to be able to make investments across Pennsylvania. That's going to grow jobs. It's going to bring companies here, have folks work here, and do what needs to be done. Those are some of the major initiatives in that space as well. We also addressed what I'll call the vulnerable population. We made significant increases, I think $75 million increase into our nursing home, our skilled nursing home folks. You know, Pennsylvania is in the midst of a crisis with respect to our nursing homes. I saw it firsthand. I have 2 nursing home facilities that are closing in my district, and one in my neighborhood, and it's problematic. And we're not necessarily having sufficient opportunity to be able to provide the skilled nursing care spots available for folks to be able to receive that care that they so richly deserve. At the end of the day, part of it is because we're not providing them enough in terms of the rates, but also part of it is the fact that we don't have the workforce that's ready and able to do that work, and we have to take great steps to be able to do that. This investment, $75 million, will be helpful. We also have $7.5 million going into our, what's referred to as our LIFE program, another important program along those lines. But also beyond that is the housing piece. Talked to you a little bit about some of the neighborhood development stuff we did in our tax code, and I could tell you that probably another major program is the FAIR program that provides housing in this Commonwealth. We are now currently at $60 million in the last fiscal year. We now will grow to $70 million, an additional $10 million this year, $10 million in next year, $10 million in next, and 10 more next after that. $100 million in programming and housing. And it's broad in terms of how those resources could be used in a variety of different ways. We make certain that whether it's investment in redeveloping housing in a neighborhood or a community, or it's working with folks to be able to have programs in the housing space to encourage folks to figure out ways to get access to housing, that's important to us, and that's something that we were able to provide. And the last piece is, as I mentioned, may have mentioned earlier, the work that the governor has been promoting with respect to investments in intellectual disability programs and autism. To me, we're making significant investments to move folks off the emergency waiting list and into community-based programming and also community work that needs to be done. That, to me, is going to be important. That is the humanistic side of who we are in terms of what needs to be done. We know more work needs to be done there, and that's going to be an asset that's going to really be something. Those programs are going to be helpful, but knowing more needs to be done, but we're setting up the stage to be able to continue to do that. So in that space of taking care of our seniors, working with their individual disabilities, making sure folks have housing, we made major investments and improvements along those lines, and that's just the beginning. Now, that all being said, we still have a budget surplus at the end of the day that's going to exceed $10 billion, probably close to $11 billion. You probably know that we now have a rainy day fund that's sitting about $7.8 billion. We just added another $850 million to it to get there. This budget year, our financial statement is probably going to be close to $4 billion. That's even if we don't pick up an additional penny from our tax streams that we're talking about. So we're sitting close to $11 billion budget surplus at the end of the day. Exactly where Governor Shapiro wanted us to be when he made his budget proposal back in February. So we have more work to be able to do to grow our revenues, but we anticipate continued growth in our economy, and the things and investments that we're making and we've made will allow that to take place. So what hasn't gotten done? And that's a big question I think a lot of folks want to hear about. We have a number of items that we had hoped to be able to address. One of them relates to transit. It's probably the most significant issue we have to deal with going forward. As many of you probably know, when we do transit increases or transit funding, we also couple that with transportation funding. At the end of this budget, probably the linchpin that closed out our budget, that got us home, was the discussion about transit funding in Pennsylvania and finding a way to be able to at least provide a partial solution. And we were able to do that. We were able to provide $80 million for transit. It's a short-term fix to get us through the fall, or get us through the fall and into the winter, and also $80 million investments in transportation as well, roads and bridges. And that was important to be able to get done, to send a signal that we recognize we need to address both those areas, and that we will. But that's a high priority, to have more permanent, recurring fix along those lines that needs to be done. And that's going to be a major topic of conversation. How we fund it remains to be seen. The governor's proposed certainly the money from the sales tax be part of where that needs to be for the transit side. It's the question is what we do with respect to the transportation side of that equation to help us get home in terms of where we need to get to. Beyond that, we continue to try to address the issue of minimum wage. You all know the story about Pennsylvania being the least among us states all around us, an island among all of our states with respect to the minimum wage. We're continue advocating for that. My hope is, and I can't expect that given that we are in the heart of an election year, we may likely see some action on that. Whether or not it's something that gets home, I think in the Senate you'll likely see action along those lines. The question I always get relates to recreational marijuana. I don't necessarily think we're going to get to it this fall, but I think the stage, depending upon the outcome of the election, the stage may be set for us to have a very serious conversation along those lines for something like that. To me, I think as we go forward, we want to begin a discussion on in the space of life sciences more broadly to make certain that we make investments along those lines. To me, I think we need to take steps to be able to put it on par with an investment along the lines of what we did this year with the SITES program. Figuring out a way to make significant and sizable investments in that space that's broad. I get that, but at the end of the day, we have to have a real serious conversation about how those investments need to be, the resources need to be boosted with respect to how we address life sciences and biotech and the like, because I think that's our future. When you look at southwestern PA, when you look at southeastern PA, two prominent areas where that can be something that's significant, I think that's something we need to talk about. Those are items, the priority items that we're going to continue to talk about. Now listen, I don't have to tell any of the folks in this room, our colleagues in the House Democratic Caucus were very successful in advancing bills over to the Senate, in excess of 350 some bills that came over. Our disappointment has been that there are a lot of major items that were left undone. And our hope is, as we go into the fall, that we'll be able to address some of these issues. We know that they are issues that the public supports. We know that. We just have to have the will to be able to address them and advance them. Many of which, I would tell you, pass with strong bipartisan support. That's what our job needs to be able to get them over the finish line and convince our colleagues that we need to take care of that. Let me just rattle off just a couple of them that are sitting in the Senate and have been for quite a long time, and we want to see advance. Fairness Act, the Patient Safety Act relating to the care that we're giving to our folks, Public Sector OSHA, background checks for firearm purchases, extreme risk protection orders. The latter two have like 85 or 90% popularity with the public. They want to see us address them. I can't get, for the life of me, understand why we can't address those. And certainly the window to justice we talked about for survivors of sexual abuse has been something that's been out there for quite a while. Those are things that I think as well we believe need to be addressed as we go forward. But you know, collectively we've done a good bit of work over the past several years. Getting through, the governor's been able to navigate through a divided legislature to be able to put forth two major investments in education, but other economic development programming as well. But our work's not done, and I look forward to the opportunity to be a part of those conversations as we move forward. So that's sort of my rambling on the budget stuff and some of the priorities for next year. Dennis, I guess when you're ready for questions, I'm ready.
We've got questions. A couple of them are, as you might expect, on the budget. And you just touched on minimum wage, but it says there was no minimum wage increase in the final budget negotiations. Republicans did signal they were somewhat open to it back in February. So what exactly happened?
I can't speak to what happened on their side of the aisle. It's always been a priority for us. Legislation has come over from the House to the Senate that laid out a path to get us to 15. But a number of other items, I guess, I suspect, push it out of the way at the end of the day.
Two similar questions. I'll read them both. Remember, I'm not the one that writes them. Last week, the Independent Fiscal Office reported that $6.6 billion general fund surplus will likely be depleted by next year. Do you anticipate tax hikes? And then the other one is, with the surplus gone next year, do you plan to raise taxes, cut spending, or ask President Harris to print more money?
Well, I certainly hope it's President Harris, and if that's an option that we'll certainly consider it. I don't believe that we are going to be out of money, as was put forth by the IFO. Listen, if you go back and look at the IFO's past 20 reports, I would probably tell you about 18 of them are incorrect. You just simply can't figure out exactly where things are going to be, where our economy is going to be a year out or 2 years out, 3 years out. That they also didn't take into consideration that we do budgets annually. So assuming that everything, we have the opportunity next year to address what needs to be done, whether it be the increased spending or putting cuts into place. So I do not anticipate, nor will we be supporting a tax increase next year. Don't think it's necessary, despite what the IFO has said.
I spoke with a Republican rural state representative who said when it comes to transit funding, they feel like all the money goes to Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, the rest of the state's an afterthought, and that's why the votes are actually difficult. What would your argument be to convince him otherwise? My
argument is there's a formula that's been in place for decades, and it drives out the transit funding based under this formula, and I think that speaks for itself. They also will tell you that when we do transit, we always do transportation funding that predominantly goes to the sites outside of Pittsburgh and Allegheny County, or southwestern PA, or southeastern PA, excuse me. So I think there's a balance, and that's what we try to find with respect to transit and transportation funding. That's what you found this last time, when $80 million went to transit, $80 million went to transportation. That'll always be the way we do it. The last time we did it, a couple of years back, it was exactly what took place. So I don't buy the argument that most of it goes to, the lion's share go, that's where the population, that's where the utilization is. But every transit agency that is an official transit agency receives funding under a formula along those lines.
This year's state budget included a $75 million increase to the EITC OSTC program. On final passage, you expressed concerns about the growth of the program and credits not being utilized. How is that concerning when there are funds not utilized by school districts?
So I think the concern I raised was that is a program that's rapidly growing. I think last year we did either 125 or 150. The year before we did something similar. It is well over, I believe, a $500 million program. I just think sometimes it's wise to be able to put the brakes on a program of that nature when we know that we don't have, in some instances, don't have full utilization of parts of the EITC programming. I'm a believer in the program. I think it makes a lot of sense. But my caution was just to maybe to slow it down a little bit, take a look at it to make sure we are doing what needs to be done. The OSTC part of the program is something I think we need to maybe look at and refigure how we drive those proceeds out as well. But at the end of the day, I just don't want to keep increasing tax credit programs just for the sake of increasing them. We ran into the same dilemma with respect to the film tax credit program. As you may know, there's been a request for $300 million in the film tax credit. We've incrementally increased it to $100 million right now, and there's no question in my mind it is a very strong and very good program. But we got to figure out the best way to be able to do it in a thoughtful way that impacts, it does what we want it to do. And I'm not quite certain that we know enough as it relates to EITC, whether or not we know if it's doing exactly what we want it to be able to do, particularly when there's other programs that are out there that we're working on, like the school choice program or the PASS program.
You mentioned recreational marijuana in your remarks. Can you give us an update on skills games, which the governor also called for in his budget, is to be taxed and regulated and an opportunity to raise revenue?
So skill games has been part of the conversation for many months now. I am not a big supporter of the skill games and the manner in which that industry came into our Commonwealth. I worked on in 2017 legislation, the last gaming legislation we did. We thought we specifically said we couldn't do skill games in Pennsylvania. Obviously, that didn't play out the way we thought it was, and now that matter and that question is before the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, so that'll resolve itself. I don't like the manner in which they thrust themselves into our communities, into our gas stations, our 7-Elevens, our Wawas, Sheetz, wherever else they are, and many other places. I think that should be done properly. The status quo, however, can't continue because, I view our casinos as our partners. They generate billions of dollars for us in this Commonwealth, and particularly as it relates to the property tax side, but also on the economic development side. So I think we need to take steps to find a solution that, in my view, regulates them and taxes them accordingly. I believe in parity with respect to the taxes. Our slot machines are at 54% or so, and if they're going to be treated as a device like a slot machine, they need to be taxed accordingly. Beyond that, if we're going to look at our VGTs that we have in our truck stops at same rate and same limitations in terms of what they can do and the numbers, that needs to be regulated in the same way. So I'm a believer in parity. Second part of that is the proceeds. What tax rate is going to be one factor, determines how much money we raise. Another thing is going to be how much we charge for each individual slot machine or skill game machine, and things along those lines. The question is going to become, how do we drive out those revenues? And as with recreational marijuana and skill games, there's probably 65 different ways people want us to spend the money in the legislature. We've got to be thoughtful in terms of how we do that and what direction we go, but we need to take a look at it. But I do think the time has come that we need to address skill games. The status quo should not be acceptable, and it's not acceptable. And the court may decide that for us, or we need to take steps to be able to address it ourselves.
Next question reads, I work in an industry that needs construction workers, all who receive good wages and benefits. It's difficult to find employees. How does legalizing recreational marijuana help me find workers who will need to pass drug tests?
It's not going to be easy. It's going to make it more difficult. But I do think what we have to do is be able to provide resources to individuals and programs, I should say to programs, that help address skill sets. That would be something that would exclude their use of recreational marijuana. We have tremendous programs across with our labor unions that do the training centers, the apprenticeship programs. I can think of 4 or 5 in my area that they're working very hard to bring folks online to get them engaged in these type of industries. So I think there's an opportunity to be able to do that. I think despite what we do with recreational marijuana, we have opportunities to be able to grow a workforce, a skilled workforce in that space, but we have to make those investments in the programs to be able to do that.
When will I be able to buy a car in Pennsylvania on a Sunday?
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't know you couldn't anymore. I thought we had gotten rid of all our blue laws, but I guess that's something, I had to check with Mark Stein, I guess. You all know Mark Stein. He may tell me what we need to do in that space. So I'm not quite sure when it looks like. I don't think there's any legislation pending. I could be wrong, but it's not one of the things that we've been discussing at all.
And I think important, given the times we're in right now, and you're in, as a delegate, please talk about the process of settling on a candidate for Democrats. Is Kamala Harris a done deal, and should she be?
I can't say it's a done deal until it's a done deal. I am a committed Biden delegate. He endorsed Vice President Harris. I'm inclined to defer to the president's desire, and I think I will be supporting Kamala Harris. I have already put out an endorsement to that effect. I think a number of my colleagues in the state Senate delegation for delegates will be doing the same. And so I do think that it will be a done deal at some point in the next several weeks. I do think that she's the right person for the job. I think she's earned the ability to be able to do that as serving as our vice president. I think represents our best option at this moment in time going forward to allow us to be successful in November, because I do think at the end of the day, we Democrats up to this point have been lacking what I'll call enthusiasm and energy towards our president. I don't mean that in a bad way. That's just where things are at. I think this overnight have flipped a switch where Democrats are energized, they're excited, they want to be engaged, they want to be involved, and I think that's what Kamala Harris brings to our party and our ticket. The next question is, I guess, Dennis, you'll probably get to, will be who's going to be the vice president, and I think that's a conversation that will play out over the course of the next couple of weeks at a minimum, if not sooner. We're fortunate as a Democratic Party across this country to have such a deep and wide bench of people who can serve as vice president, who have the ability to serve as president if need be, and I think that's an important factor. So I think when you look at some of the people who are under consideration, I think that's something that's going to be important, and they bring a lot of talents and skills, but they also bring a lot of, in some of the conversations, different states that will be beneficial to Democrats going forward as it relates to our electoral college.
Well, as we talked to you at 1 o'clock on a Monday afternoon, you are a delegate. Talk about the process. You can vote for, you technically, I guess, could vote for whoever you want. And what has the communication from the DNC been to the various delegates?
So I can say, yes, when we go there in a couple of weeks, I have the ability to support anyone I choose. Someone's nominated, or I can nominate somebody, I can select that person. As I indicated, I'm committed to where I'm committed. So that'll be the process. I don't anticipate any major party folks seeking the nomination at this point. We've heard, folks putting their toe in and taking their toe out right away. But for the most part, all the major candidates, I think, have already said they're going to be supporting Vice President Harris, and I think that's where things are going to end up at. But theoretically, I can vote on anybody I want to be able to do in that regard. With respect to the DNC, I've not received direct communication from the DNC. I did speak with our chairperson, my colleague, Senator Sheree Street, a couple of times yesterday about what the process is going to be and what's taking place and what they anticipate many of the other states are going to be doing as they go forward in terms of endorsing Vice President Harris. So, that's the communication that we did receive. At 1 o'clock today, there is a call that I'm supposed to get on. So I will be getting from... So there is a call we have at 1 o'clock to discuss it, but that'll be just Pennsylvania delegates, not national delegates.
And what's the role, what do you anticipate with Governor Josh Shapiro, because obviously his name is being prominently mentioned?
No, I think Josh's record, I just talked about, has been a very successful record, again, in the divided legislature to be able to make significant investments. We should be proud of the fact that our governor is being considered for such a wonderful position. I think he has the capability of doing the job, certainly, and stepping in as president if need be. But I think he's one of a number of folks who are being considered, and that's how we should approach it. We're fortunate that he's been able to do the things he's done, and I'm very pleased with the work we've done together, and I think he's moved Pennsylvania forward, and I think there's a lot of positive aspects to that. So we'll see how it all plays out, but as I mentioned, he's one of a number of folks. But we should be really happy that our governor, the work that he's been doing is reflective of Pennsylvania. And what it does in my view, if he is being considered, it elevates the things that we've done in Pennsylvania. It talks about the historic investments we made in education the last couple of years. It talks about our economic development aspects of what we've done. It talks about our investments in intellectual disability programming and the like, and providing services. These things, because of his presence in this conversation with a bunch of other folks, elevates Pennsylvania and the work that we've done collectively in a bipartisan way. I think that's important for us, and that benefits all of us.
Okay, we want you to be able to make your 1 o'clock call, because it's probably pretty important. We want to thank you for being with us, certainly. And our next luncheon, I do want to note, is Monday, August 19th, when our guest will be Eugene DePasquale. DePasquale is a candidate for Pennsylvania Attorney General. Senator Costa, we certainly wish you the best, and thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Dennis, and thank the Press Club. Thank you. Thank you.
Josh, is there a real chance Josh Shapiro is selected?
I think there's a chance. I don't have any firsthand knowledge speaking with anyone, but I do think he presents a number of opportunities where he could be successful. So,
my last question is, there's a legislative surplus account, completely unrelated surplus account. You guys got a couple $100 million in there, and yet gave yourselves an increase in this year's budget, 7% for the House and 8% for you, or vice versa. Either way, gave yourselves more money. A lot of people think that's already too much, should have given some back, and yet you put more money into that account. What's behind that?
Well, I think part of it is that as we move forward, we're experiencing increased costs. We have increases related to cost of living increases for our members and the like, and not only them, but also our staff folks as well. I'm of the belief that if we have members getting increases, that our staff should get some proportional increase as well. And that's a big part of it. So going forward, to be able to keep talented people, that's part of the equation as well. We're blessed to have great people working in the House and the Senate on both sides of the aisle. To be able to retain them and be able to continue to have them work with us, sometimes you need to do some of these things. So it's important to allow us to have that ability to have flexibility. You know, in the past, we exhausted all that not too long ago. In 15, 16, we went down a path where we exhausted all our reserves. In fact, I remember my colleague, Pro Tem then, and I had to sign bank letters borrowing money to be able to make sure. So it's important for us to have sufficient reserves to be able to address if, in fact, there is gridlock or there is something that prevents us from enacting a budget.
You're headed for a call right now on the delegate situation. Is something going to happen really quickly?
No, I just think it's an update call with the DNC and then also our PA Dems. It's more than
Sharif wants it to happen quickly. Are you of the same belief? Get this thing buttoned down?
I think the sooner we get it buttoned down, maybe the better off we are. But I think, we're blessed to have a good group of candidates, and I think we have to be thoughtful and strategic in terms of how we go about selecting somebody.
On the budget-related question, how hard did Senate Republicans or the administration push on school vouchers? One of the everybody says they still want it, but I don't know how aggressively they were opposing it.
I know that both of them had an interest in it going forward, but I think other types of education investments sort of moved that in another direction. For example, the ITC and some other student-teacher stipend, a few other things as well. And also the amount of money we did in the higher ed space. I didn't talk about some of the scholarships we're doing for colleges and university students. Every student in college will be able to receive up to $5,000 as last money in. That was a significant push for them, so that may have, in my view, maybe a pushback, I don't know, the past conversation. But making those investments in higher ed and providing for colleges, and then the parity with respect to out-of-state students coming into PASSHE schools, that was another high priority for them as well. So they achieved those two things, and maybe I can't speak as to why PASS wasn't as highly pursued.